Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts, and you are listening to the Giving Town podcast, where we share stories of hope and generosity in our wonderful community of Newberg, Oregon, and the surrounding area. In today's episode, I'm talking to Jan Hart with the Newberg High School Resource Room. Today, we'll be discussing how the resource rooms got started, why they're so important, and the impact they've had on local students and families. I make this podcast because I love this town, I love highlighting the great organizations and people of this community, and I love helping people move here. This podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Driffel Roberts Group, and we help people do just that. We help people move to and within and without of Newberg. We also have a YouTube channel that educates people on the more real estate related aspects of living in Newberg. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out in our channel, which is linked in the description below. So I hope today you enjoy the conversation with Jan, and I hope you learn a lot of great things and are inspired to do your part to make a difference in our town. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. I'm here today with Jan Hart, the resource room leader at Newberg High School. So thank you, Jan, for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So resource rooms, a lot of people have heard of the resource rooms. It's kind of, there's been a lot of talk in different circles about them, but many people I think don't really know what they are or how they work or what even the story is. So can you start just by sharing what a resource room is and how it works?
Sure. We have a resource room in each of the 10 schools. That's not always been the case, but basically the resource room is intended to be a safe, welcoming space where any student can come. In our setting, it's any Newberg High School student or a Catalyst student from the Catalyst Alternative School can come to get access to basic need items, things like school supplies, clothing, shoes, food, hygiene supplies, and snacks, and it's all donation driven, so there's never a cost. So it's intended primarily to support kids who are having trouble accessing those basic needs because of their home situation, for whatever reason, and often because of economically where they're situated.
Sure.
And without that availability, they wouldn't have the school supplies, and often they would be wearing shoes that don't fit. And so it's access for them to come and any student to feel non-judged and supported and free to take what they need and advocate for themselves to kind of help them learn that as well. Yeah,
which is really important for students who already may not have the best home life or economic background. Mm-hmm. Even you kind of chuckled when you said snacks, but if the kid doesn't have breakfast in the morning and then is trying to learn, that makes a huge difference.
It makes a huge difference.
I remember it's been a little while, but when I was in high school, I ate, I think, in every single class because I was always hungry.
Yeah.
So I can imagine how nice that would be to have that.
Yeah. We have students that come regularly. We're just open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11:30 to 1:30. So we're open during lunch breaks. And part of the purpose of that is because there's only so many volunteers willing to give just so many hours, but also to help them sort of learn to be responsible for planning. Like, I know I'm going to need a spiral notebook on Wednesday, and I know they're not here tomorrow, so I better go on Monday and get what I need, to kind of encourage that kind of thing. And we also, I'm able to support the counseling office and the safety officer's office with snacks so that when we're not there, kids who really need something are still able to get something. Yeah.
So how does that work when a student realizes, hey, there's something I need? How does that work for them to go from recognizing the need to then going into the resource room and getting it? Is it just kind of like shelves? They just go and shop, or what is it?
Sometimes that's a leap for a lot of kids because they're reluctant, whether they're embarrassed or they just feel awkward about it. And oftentimes it's someone who's already familiar with their room that'll say to a friend, hey, come with me. In the high schools, in the middle school, kids can just come to the room. In the elementary schools, they have to come with a teacher or a counselor. Okay. Our kids can come to our room anytime that we're open, it's all, we're in a new space, so it's all newly organized. But everything's arranged. When they walk in the room, there's a counter with snacks, and there's racks with clothing, racks that have been donated by local folks, and then we have shelves full of hygiene supplies, school supplies, pajama bottoms. Right now we have a little Christmas tree that's got tons of small fleece blankets underneath, and they can come in and pick whichever one they want and take that home with them and pluck a candy cane off the tree. And then we have a rack with food that they can take home, cereal, and like we found pasta sauce in cans so they can put it in their backpack and not worry about it breaking. A jar of sauce in their backpack would be bad. So there's that option. Kids are a little less likely to take food home, but they're getting better at it. Oftentimes kids will come in saying, gosh, I need a mechanical pencil for class. But then they see what we have. If it's their first time in the room, and that gives them an opportunity to go, oh, I would be able to get that. I could get new underwear. I could get a pair of warm socks. So a lot of times it's just getting them in that first time, and we don't keep track of what people take. We're kind of keeping track of how many kids we see in a day, just because we're in a new space, and we were concerned about whether or not they would find us because we're across the parking lot in the new building with the health center. It's not been a problem. We saw 33 kids on Friday.
Oh, wow. Okay. Which
is a record for the time I've been there. It's really just a matter of getting them to the room and letting them have that feeling that it's safe. We're not there to judge. We're not keeping track of what they take, and we're trusting that they're just going to take what they need. Yeah. And 99% of the time, they just take what they need. Yeah.
So how did the resource rooms get started?
Well, if you don't mind me sharing a little story.
Yeah, please.
They started 7 years ago. The first room started at Chehalem Valley Middle School, and it was started by a very good friend of mine, Emily Klumak, who I didn't know at the time, but I became a volunteer for her. And it was fueled by her experience in middle school when a young man moved here with his parents from at a fairly impoverished part of Europe, no family, just him and his mom and dad. His dad was an alcoholic and eventually left the family. They had very little, and Emily and this young man became very close friends. And in the course of the next several years, Dad left and Mom worked 2 jobs, and people in the community started to realize through her help that he needed support. He needed glasses. Somebody stepped up and took him to the optometrist and got him glasses. Yeah. Somebody found out that he wasn't going to play football at the high school because he couldn't afford the athletic fee. Somebody paid his athletic fee. Yeah. And rather that amount of those little supports lifted him up in a way that he got a scholarship to a university in Southern California and played football there, and returned as a successful guy and married Emily.
Wow.
And I didn't know that story until she shared it fairly recently. Yeah. Because it's hard for her to tell it without crying. Yeah. But it was that experience of thinking, where are the people to help him? Yeah. And then she realized that's us, that needs to be us, because somebody has to step up. Yeah. So that sort of fueled her passion, and some things that her son experienced at the middle school. He didn't have a need for economic reasons, but he was seeing it in other kids and bringing that information home to her. So she fought very hard to get a reasonable space in the middle school where they could supply just the basic needs. And then over the next couple of years, they grew one at the high school. She and a woman named Holly were pretty much the power behind that with a whole bunch of volunteers. So it's all been, I can't take credit for what it is other than our recent move was pretty huge. I'm going to take credit for that because I'm exhausted, but in a good way. So it took some time to sort of help administration understand what the purpose was. And it's taken some education in the community as well. I can't count the number of times when I was still working at the hospital as a nurse that coworkers, and I started to volunteer before I retired, and coworkers would say, well, why do we need a resource room? 40% or more, over 40% of our kids live below the poverty line in Newburgh. Wow. That's huge.
That is huge.
And I'm seeing kids that, there's so much they wouldn't have if we didn't have this for them. Yeah. And sometimes it's just coming in and connecting. I see kids oftentimes that just, I've had kids walk into the rooms and usually we'll just say, hey, how are you today? Anything special you need? And I have kids say, I just needed a minute. I just needed to take a breath. or I just needed a hug. And as luck would have it, I'm a hugger, so that works out just fine. Not during COVID so much, but so it's sort of multi-purpose in that way. And we have some kids that just have almost nothing at home, and so they will fill a couple of bags with food that they can take home with them.
Well, I think it's one of those things that if you don't experience it, if you don't experience poverty, you take things for granted.
Absolutely.
And it's not until you actually recognize, oh, wow, like a recent, it's not really recent anymore, but a previous episode we did with the family place, learning that some kids go, because just for economic reasons, because parents can't afford it, kids get one diaper a day. And I can't really share that without crying, because I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old thinking, if I can change their diaper, I can, and that's the hard part. Yeah. And thankfully we haven't had to deal with that, but just recognizing, like, I think if you're not in experiencing poverty, it's really easy to just say, oh, well, make up some excuse. They need to like get a job or whatever. And it's like, no, you don't understand what these people are going through. And so having something like that, I think, is so crucial, because at the high school age, it's different. But I think of not having shoes that fit, or not having clothes that are clean, like a previous episode we did with like Loads of Hope, like being able to get laundry service, or not having food, and I like not having just those opportunities. And you share, like, with Emily's husband, who knows what would have happened if he could have easily ended up on the streets, like if he wasn't able to get through high school. And I mean, that's what happens.
And that's the part of the story I forgot to mention, was that in high school his mom got cancer and passed away.
Oh my gosh.
And he was lucky enough to have, a friend whose home he was able to live in. I don't think it was Emily's home, but, at least, a solid home. Yeah. But that in itself is devastating, and having already had your dad sort of disappear into the sunset. And so there's no telling if he hadn't had that kind of community support from, the right people to step up and say, hey, we care about you and we want you to do well. Yeah. And it's a hard message to get through to kids sometimes. Yeah. I see oftentimes, I'll see someone come in the room and, for example, a young lady was getting some shampoo, and I'm like, would you like some conditioner to go with it? She's like, oh, is that okay? Like, they're hesitant. And I give them a bag and go, okay, well, how about some deodorant? How about some this? Do you need a brush, a comb? We have all those things.
If you don't need to bring it back.
I had a young man come in just the other day who, I greeted him and said, anything special you're looking for? And then I back off, and I just say, if they say no, not really, I'm just, walking through, then I'll just give them space and let them see what we've got. In his case, he says, I think I need shoes. And I looked at his feet, and he was wearing something just a smidgen better than slippers. And you could tell his toes were about to bust out the ends. And I said, oh, yes, you do need shoes. Yeah. And as luck would have it, we just had a huge donation from the New Balance outlet. The manager brought us 4 huge boxes. Oh, wow. And so I pulled a chair over to our shoe rack, and he tried on a couple of pairs, and he found a pair that fit perfectly. He loved them. And he said, do I just take these? And I said, absolutely. That's what we do. But, the way that just elevated him was remarkable. Just to have the opportunity to, walk around in a good pair of supportive shoes. Yeah. And, it's wintertime.
It's a huge difference.
So,
I mean, if I don't have the right socks and shoes, and my toes get cold, which may not seem like a huge deal, but I think if you're in an environment where you're physically uncomfortable because you're cold, and maybe it's not as bad inside, but trying to learn in an
some
environment
days like, it is.
That's true.
The heating's not that great some days.
So who are some of the people who donate? You mentioned the New Balance outlet. Are there a lot of partners you guys have?
We're not consistent with, I'd say we have consistent monetary donations. We depend on physical donations, primarily from the community. We do have an Amazon wish list, and my brother-in-law annually he was married to my sister who passed away. That's why I only talk about him making the donation, because it would always have been both of them. But he orders us 1 or 2 of everything off of our wish list every year at Thanksgiving, and helps us put up our little Christmas tree. And various people, a local CPA donates stuff off our wish list annually. People donate, ideally, gently used clothes. We don't take used socks or underwear, and if somebody decides to give us those, they get thrown away.
Yeah,
but most of the donations we receive are, gently used clothes. We actually have a washer and dryer, so if something's in great shape but needs to be washed, I'm able to do that readily. So most of our clothing is used, but still in great shape. And then there's monetary donations we regularly get from Rotary. There is actually a winery that donates, I believe it's $1,200 a year, and when they sold their business, they made that part of the contract that the new owner has to continue to do that, which is it's pretty meaningful. The thrift store actually recently donated $1,200 to us. Back when Newburgh Fire Department was still Newburgh Fire Department, they gave us $5,000 several years ago. So that money stays in an account. It's handled a little bit differently at every school, but in my setting, if I have a student who really needs something and we don't have it, if it's a reasonable request, like we had a student that needed a certain kind of boot in order to have this job, and it wasn't a huge amount, I think it was $40, and so we talked about it and decided we'll just get them for them. So that's sort of the exception, but what I typically use it for is things that we have gaps in. Like I don't like to put deodorant on our wish list because I can get it at the dollar store for $1.25. But I can get 50 of them, and I don't feel comfortable asking people to go spend $4 for something I can get for $1.25. So we'll load up on things like that and use that account. This time of year we have a huge demand for sweatshirts and sweatpants, so I can find we're fabulous bargain hunters, so I'll find like the hottest deal, and then I just go through the bookkeeper, or sometimes I put it on my own credit card because I can't help myself, and then they reimburse me. So that's the monetary donations are super important for us to be able to fill the gaps for things like new underwear and new socks and sweatshirts and sweatpants, that kind of thing, and that's what we use the money for.
And I was curious, you mentioned the process of getting it started and trying to convince the administration. I'm curious if you could go back and kind of share what those conversations looked like to a degree and how you kind of won them over.
I wish I could, because I wasn't part of the story then. I just stepped in about 4 years ago when I volunteered for Emily for a year, and then she had been doing this for 5 years and told me one afternoon as I was finishing up my volunteer hour that she was going to be stepping down. And she needed somebody to, take her place. And I was like, oh, who's that going to be? She's like, I'm looking at you. Luckily, she's been very available to me. I mean, I was a labor and delivery nurse for years, so this wasn't exactly my wheelhouse, but I loved my volunteer time there. And so I jumped in and she held my hand until I kind of got my wings spread a little bit. And she's been a huge support just anytime I can't quite figure out how to manage something. So it was really just helping administration understand why it was important and that it needed to be an actual room, where we could put stuff on shelves and racks so kids could walk in and see it, not have it just be a closet. So she said that was a little bit of a process. Each school is a little bit different. I have enormous support from Mark Brown is one of the assistant principals, and he's our liaison. The principal is enormously supportive. There's never been an ask that they have, that's reasonable that they have. Or if I'm not sure, would it be okay to do X, Y, or Z? They can guide me or give me a better idea. So we have tons of support, and I think it's a little bit different at some schools. I think my friend at Mountain View has had a few challenges last year, and it's gotten much better this year. She took over because no one was really leading the room, and she had to resurrect it, and because there's pretty high need in that environment and in that school. So I don't really know the actual conversations. I just know Emily said it was kind of an uphill battle until she got them. And I think it's misunderstood, not by the person who's our liaison. I think he very much understands the mission. Occasionally we'll get a donation from someone in the school. Like last year, they cleaned out the locker room and just brought me everything that was in people's lockers. Some of it you would not want. Anyway, it was an interesting donation, and we had to wear gloves to go through it. Some of it was very well-loved clothing. But we did pull a couple dozen very good PE uniforms out of it, and I washed them and dried them, and we've handed them out to a whole bunch of kids that otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford them. So it all worked out, but the labor that's involved when you get donations that are questionable is, and then the poor folks that are taking out the garbage, the custodial staff is, probably not too thrilled about that, but... But most of the donations we receive are fabulous. We had to hold on that through the summer and until we got moved into our new space in October. So I just had nowhere to put it. Everything was stored in some giant pod somewhere. So we started out the school year with just a table in the commons. So kids could still, because I didn't want them to forget we exist.
Right.
And I had set aside what I could for just school supplies and hygiene primarily, so that they could still come and get those things. And we handed out a lot of school supplies. And I think we raised a lot of awareness. Yeah. So.
Well, that's awesome because it just made me think, you were talking about the middle school. There's, the other schools too, that this isn't as much of an insight there, but I just remember that kids are not... The things that you learn, that everyone should learn, even from a young age, of being polite and courteous. Middle school and high school are kind of times where those lessons are completely forgotten. Sometimes, people are not always as kind, and the bullying is not as much usually physical anymore as it is, emotional and verbal, those kind of things. And rather than having empathy and compassion for someone who is in a really hard economic situation, those kids usually get picked on more. So
yes, that is true. And it's one of the lovely things about sharing the space now with the health center. We were always across from the wellness center, but now we have a shared space and they can get in and out of our room readily. So if they have students that need something when we're not there, they can go in and get those things for that student. But the really important part is that if I have a student who comes in who's clearly been a victim of, they're like, I'll usually say, how's your day going? And sometimes they're like, not so good, and then I have somebody crying on my shoulder. I can literally get them through the door into the next room and get them connected with somebody for a mental health visit. And then I think in our first 4 weeks, it was like 160 mental health visits that they had in the health center, and we're seeing 30-some kids a day the ability to connect those two, because oftentimes kids are coming to us because they're having a hard time. We have a jar of what we call encouragements that we've had since before I started. And sometimes they just come in because they want a mint and a high five.
So it's like a mint with an...
they're individually wrapped life-saver mints in a big jar. And I made a little thing that says encouragements. So it's... and sometimes they just come in for that and to tell somebody how their day's going. So
I think that's hard to overstate, though, the importance of having someone who cares. I mean, even though it's not a peer, but if you don't have a supportive home life and you're experiencing difficulty at school, and when we talked in the past about the Wellness Collective and how that, and is that the Wellness Center you're referring to? Is that put on by or is that the Wellness Collective, or is that completely separate?
It's a Providence-funded clinic, or a health center. It's a student-based health center is what they call it. It's surprising there's like 80 of them in the state of Oregon. I was surprised to learn that. And so they do, they have counseling service through Yamhill County Mental Health, as well as Providence providers and our own school counselors. And they also can do some physical health things. They can do, sore throats or, various things up to a point. It's kind of like similar to what you would go to urgent care for. But the highest number of things we're seeing are kids who are needing counseling and just need to touch base with somebody. Luckily for the kids, I'm the oldest volunteer. So some of them call me like I'm the Mimi of the resource room. That's fine, because I am. And most of them are a little bit younger. But as long as you greet them with an open heart, it doesn't seem to matter. Initially, because I was way the oldest when I first started. All the other volunteers had school age kids, and mine are grown and flew the nest some time ago. So I was concerned. Will they be able to relate to me? But they love me.
Well, if you're like the Mimi, then, I think there's much to be said for a grandma type figure. I think there's just some level of, I don't even know how to describe it, but kind of an easier, instant bond, where
Yeah.
I think you know what I'm talking about. I think a lot of kids need that. I think the encouragement, and sometimes you have the ability to like tell someone how it is, but when they know that you care, you know, they can, you know.
And I've been blessed with a handful of volunteers that just sort of fell into my life, and it's just such a wonderful, cohesive group where we each commit to a couple hours a week. For me, it's more like 20 right now, but that's okay. You know, the paycheck is all hugs and high fives and knowing that you made a difference. So, but most of our volunteers commit to a couple hours a week. Emily was very adamant that, you know, it was 1 hour a week, and then because she didn't want anybody to burn out. But, this is the agreement that our small group came to, and everybody's like, well, I'm already there for an hour. I might as well stay for 2. Because everybody that's volunteered for me currently, they just absolutely love being in the room. And they're sad if for some reason they can't make it. So, and I think the students feel that we love what we do, and, you know, we just want to help them. When we find somebody who really needs something and we happen to have just the right thing, I think we're more excited than they are.
Well, and I think when you see something that's really making an impact like that, you know, you're making a difference in someone's life, that and, you know, like what you share with Emily's husband when he was in middle school, you never know when what you're doing could have that kind of effect on someone. And
absolutely.
And I think sometimes as, you know, dramatic as it might sound, I really think sometimes it is a matter of life and death, whereas like the object isn't, but someone going through the day, and that if they've been picked on or bullied or whatever, you never know where someone's at mentally, but when they can come and get that support and know that there is someone who cares, that can be a foundation that can help someone get through the next day.
Kind of counteract the negative part. And
I think you don't find out until after. Maybe sometimes people never share the story, but I've heard so many stories like that where someone comes back and says to someone who's, you know, just that same kind of thing, is like, you didn't realize it then, but you actually saved my life, because you know, that was the end for me. And then, you know, the fact that you did whatever you did can be as simple as like helping them carry their books to the locker, you know, whatever it is.
I actually just got a note this week from a student that I saw. She always came on my days when I was just a volunteer. And I mean, when I was, you know, before I took over the room, and then when I started being there, you know, several times a week, she came always last year. And she's just sent me a note. She's at Catalyst this year because it was just a better setting for her, partly because she was being bullied. But just sent me a note and said what a huge difference being able to come to the room and visit with me made in her getting through that year at Newburgh High. And I mean, I don't recall that I did anything, you know, and I don't think I saved her life, but if I, you know, eased the way a little bit, then, you know, totally worth my time. But,
and you never know.
And she's one of those kids, you know, we message back and forth, and, you know, she needs a lot of support. So,
What would you say one of your favorite stories? I mean, you've shared a couple already, but like of a student that came in that you're like, wow, like this is exactly what we're here for.
Actually, right at the beginning of this year, most of the kids are pretty appreciative and have pretty decent manners. There's always a few. They're teenagers. But when we were just a table in the Commons, a young man came up to the table, and he was very shy about it. But he said, you know, somebody told me that you might be able to help me get shoes. He's like whispering it almost, and I kind of looked over the table, and it was 90 degrees out, and he's wearing leather boots with holes in the toes. And I said, we absolutely can. I said, I don't have any like right here because everything was stored in wherever it was stored. I said, but I can get you some if you can hold out for a couple of days. And so I just pulled up Amazon on my phone, and we went in a corner and looked through and found a pair that he liked. I said, if you can come back on Wednesday, they'll be here. And so he came back, and he kind of walked up to the table. He goes, do you remember me? And I'm like, I do remember you. And so we went there's a little back space in the attendance office, so we went back there so he could try them on without having an audience, because that could be awkward for him. And just the look on his face, he put them on and they were $15 shoes, just black sneakers. But he said, it's the first time I've had a pair of shoes that fit me in a long time. He said, they just feel so good. And so just, that tiny thing to have such a huge impact. And he was just so delightfully appreciative. And he actually came to see me in the room a couple of weeks ago. And it was just in September that we got him shoes. But we were talking, and I happened to look down at his feet, and I'm like, oh, those shoes we got you aren't holding up so well, are they? He's like, oh, no, they're fine. I said, no, they're really not, because they were coming apart.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're the only shoes he had. And we just happened to have just gotten a donation of some very nice shoes. And we sorted through, and I found them up here. I'm like, I don't know if you like these. He's like, I like those. They're like, I think they were Converse. I don't know. But so it was my second experience with him. And he was, and I mean, he floated out of the room. Yeah. He goes, it's almost like I'm barefoot, but I'm not. And just the joy that little gesture gave to him. He's my favorite of this year so far. Really, kids, I love you all. But that was just super impactful and just a very respectful and appreciative kiddo. Yeah. So he comes by sometimes just to get an encouragement and a high five. And yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you've faced? I know you just recently moved. That sounded like it was kind of
that was
a big deal too.
That was a huge challenge. I had actually spent a lot of time during COVID sorting through everything that had sort of accumulated, because when you have 8 volunteers and everybody's only there for an hour, and you do as much as you can, but you can only sort through so many donations and deal with so much, and still spend time with the kids, because that's our primary mission when we're in the room. And sometimes donations can be overwhelming when we're getting a lot. So I had just spent weeks and weeks clearing that out when I found out we had to clear out. And it was the end of the school year, and I said to Mark Brown, so will I be able to get into the school during the summer to, get everything packed up? And he says, oh, actually you have to be out at the end of next week. I'm like, oh, I'm talking about tons and tons of stuff. So that was a huge challenge. But boy, my volunteers dove in, and we got everything packed in boxes and labeled so we would know which end was up when we finally got our stuff back, and packed some stuff up. The lovely person who runs the attendance office gave us space to store things that we would have some stuff in the fall. And then, the challenge for me when school opened was to have enough of a presence that kids would know what we are and what we did, and especially like freshmen, they don't know. So I did, some signage and stuff to, say, come see us when we get moved, and kind of made a big deal about the fact that we were going to have a fancy new room, and, because we were very concerned, will kids come across the parking lot to find us? But they flattened the building we were in. So juggling that in the beginning, and we also I stock all the girls' restrooms with pads and tampons, and the bigger restrooms have a cart with toothpaste and toothbrushes and combs and hair ties, and that needs to be done at least every couple of weeks. So that's sort of a constant challenge, but we get enough donations, and I just traipse around campus and hit every bathroom. But the moving was a challenge, to try to make a space that it's basically the same amount of square footage, but but part of it's a kitchen, which we're not actually using as a kitchen. But it was less expensive to leave it than it was to tear it out. So my first impression when I walked in was like, what on earth? But we're making it work, and it's actually working out great. And we have huge windows, we have bright light. So once we got moved in, once I wrapped my brain around the fact that it was going to be very different, I'm not one of those people that moves their furniture every few months because I want to, change it up. Like, that would be my daughter. So this was such a huge change. So it was hard, but we, between my volunteers and I, everybody thinks a little bit differently. So, we all sort of pitched in to sort of visualize, how can we make this cohesive, so when kids walk in, it's easy for them to see, what's available. And it's worked out great. So that was and COVID was a big challenge too. How do I support kids when they can't come to school? So the solution for that, the best I could come up with, was an idea I stole from McMinnville Resource Room, which was to create a Google requests form, and they could go in, and only I could see it, so they knew that it was private, and I put specific things on there that I could supply, and they would check off what they needed and give me their home address, and I did front porch drop-offs for kids during COVID. And luckily it wasn't a phenomenal number, because I thought, what have I done? But it worked out great, and it helped, I don't know, maybe a dozen kids and their families, because I took them food for for families and stuff. So,
well, thank you for doing that. That's huge.
No, it makes me very happy. So it's not really a big sacrifice on my part.
Well, I think it's true that, there's this saying, it's more blessed to give than receive.
Oh,
and I think
100%. Yeah.
I think that's, very evident when you're able to do those kinds of things and really help out. I think the joy, especially that you see when someone's appreciative or just knowing that you did make a difference, it does what very few other things can do, which is part of why I make this podcast. Is not that you're not at all going out there sharing like, oh, I want people to know how, all these things that they're doing like that. That's not it at all.
Right.
But I think people hearing stories of how rewarding it is to do, to live your life in a way that's serving other people is like, I think it's contagious. Like seeing that's, I want to do that too. Like when all you hear is the negative news or whatever, it's so easy to get depressed or discouraged or feel like, what's the point in trying? But there are so many people like you who are doing amazing things and are spending a lot of your time and resources helping out. And I really think that's ultimately the culture of Newburgh at its core. I
want to believe that.
Yeah. And I've been doing this a lot. And the cool thing for me, just kind of selfishly, as I do this podcast, I continually get introduced to more and more people who are doing amazing things. Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, it's like, Newark's like the best town ever. Cause I get sent all the people who are like, hey, you need to talk to this person.
Right.
But it is very encouraging because there really are a lot. I can't compare to other towns because I don't know, but I just know here I'm continually blown away by all that our community does to support each other. I
was blown away at the Pale Rays auction that Emily and I attended. We were asked to speak because they had made a decision that the resource rooms and their tuition funds would be, I don't mean tuition, but their scholarship funds would be the focus of their Paddle Rays. And to feel the support I felt, getting up a nervous wreck because I'm not a public speaker, but just the way the room felt, and then the response after Emily and I told our story. I mean, paddles were flying. Yeah. And I think they raised like $11,000. It
was a lot.
And it will be shared by, all the resource rooms and even smaller places. I noticed on Honey Pie's site that they do a Pie with Purpose each month. Mm-hmm. And so I had sent an email at the end of last school year and just said, hey, would you ever consider, the resource room as being here? And she's like, absolutely, I got a spot in August, like that. And that was like over $700 that they gave. And, I shared it with all the, got a little something for every room. Yeah. So, bits and pieces, but I've never had anybody say no. I just sent an email out to all the dentists in Newburgh, and Dundee Dental actually was the one to respond. And I went and picked up a huge box of toothbrushes and a giant box of dental floss and toothpaste and all this stuff. And I'm glad to say kids are using it.
Yeah.
They're brushing their teeth. Yeah. But it was like way more than I expected. Yeah. 2 bags of lip balm, which is hard to get it, decent stuff, and kids want it.
Yeah.
So
especially in the winter.
It was 2 trips to the car with all the stuff they gave me. It was enormously generous and a huge boost for those are some of the things that we put on our carts in the restroom. So it's a great community. I've had so much support. The woman who owns Coffee Cat, I made a comment on her page about a particular sticker that she had that I found uplifting, and I thought, boy, kids would love that. Yeah. And I said, where'd you get those? And she gave me like 50 of them. She just says, just come pick them up. I'll give you some. Yeah. So she's done that for us a couple of times.
Yeah, she's great too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Is there any way that the community can learn more about this or get more involved if they want to volunteer or something like that?
Volunteer. The options are really volunteering, and there's a number of ways that people can do that. Every room is led by a different volunteer parent or community member. Yeah. But every resource room has a Facebook page with contact information. My personal cell phone and email are on the Newburgh High School Resource Room page on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm happy to chat with people about that. They have to have a volunteer badge, which isn't that hard of a process as long as you don't have a criminal background. To volunteer to actually be in the room with students, we're asking people to commit, to a specific time frame every week.
Okay.
And we trade and bounce back and forth, when necessary. Most rooms are asking for maybe less than that, but it's a fairly small commitment. A lot of my volunteers work full-time jobs, and they still just can't wait to come do their 2 hours because it's great stuff. But so volunteering is one option. There's other ways to volunteer. Some of what I did when I was a new volunteer was make the Costco run to get all the fig bars for kids' snacks. And Amazon wish list is another way they can help.
Okay.
I think most of the rooms have developed an Amazon wish list, and you'll find it on their social media site. That's a way to, donate from home and never have to leave the house.
Yeah.
Because it's set up so it's delivered directly to the school.
Okay.
Gently used clothes that are appropriate sizes for whatever school you're supporting. I know Edwards is often in need. They just got some of the New Balance shoes from that lovely donation. So that's one way. I mean, monetary donations, we'd never turn that down. I know for the high school, we're in pretty good shape in that department because we have so much community support that comes to us in that way. That's primarily, if somebody wants to volunteer, almost any of the schools could probably use at least one more person. Yeah. Chehalem Valley Middle School just reopened their room recently, and they could really use a couple of volunteers. And I think that the Crater Elementary could as well. Okay. I could probably use one more. I have one that had to take a step outside for some medical reasons. So, we're a short one, but we're doing great anyway. So, my family wonders, are you ever coming home from the resource room? So those are the main things. I've had people offer, to do food drives. Sometimes small businesses will say, we'd like, or a church. We'll say, and then they'll do one specific thing like backpacks or blankets, something like that. So that's always helpful if you're attached to a group in a church or a small business that, that everybody might be able to pitch in that way or do a little food drive, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us today and about the resource rooms. One more question that I'd like to ask is, given what you've been doing in the community and your involvement here, what gives you hope for the future of Newburgh?
I'm an incurable optimist to begin with. So I refuse to believe that we can't do better than what's gone on the last couple of years. It was encouraging to me after all the hubbub around the school board and other things this past year and a half or so. It was encouraging to me at the beginning of the year to get a sense of the way kids are feeling in school. It didn't feel, I think a lot of us felt like, is everybody going to be miserable and upset? And I think teachers and administration did a great job of, making everything feel as normal as it could. I can't say how it impacted staff because it doesn't affect me that same way. Right. I have grandkids, so I think about, how does that negativity, is it long term? I want people to meet in the middle and get better. And I really think that can happen. I want to think it's just been a bump in the road. Mm-hmm. I was raised by people that were givers. We didn't have a lot, but we never lacked for anything. But they, took us to donate to people that had nothing, so that we could learn that. And I did the same with my kids. So just that constant glimmer of hope that it can always be better, if we're just willing to pitch in and, if I can be in the room and have a great conversation with kids of all walks of life. That was part of what I learned as a nurse, that, you got to meet people where they are and make them, let them feel respected and supported. I don't know what the solution is, but I believe with all my heart it's going to get better. And there's a reason we moved to Newburgh 20 years ago, and I don't think that's gone away. I think there's been some mud in the water, as we all know, and I won't go into it, but I think it can get cleared up. I have to believe that it can just be better. People are better than that. I think the bulk of Newburgh residents, want good for all of us.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right, and that's part of why I do this because I love sharing that same message. It's fun to hear it from other people too.
I just posted something actually on my personal Facebook that said, it's not a popular opinion, but I really think everything's going to come out okay.
Well, I think it will too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jan. It was great talking with you.
Letting me share about what we do.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to the Givingtown podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newburgh so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.